from 1952 to 1953, 8 articles were published that probably had as much to do as a singular event as any other publication, series of articles, or for that matter, even congressional efforts.
Welcome to today's webinar, which is Aviation Journalism, the History, Importance, and the Future. Our presenters are going to be Annamarie Buonocore and Ed Downs, both from Inflight Magazine, and they're going to split this presentation up. So it's been a long time since we've done one with multiple presenters. So we'll take total responsibility if things don't work because we've got too many presenters on here. We'll figure out how to make it work better next time. The first thing, two things I'm going to do. First of all, I encourage you to text questions in as soon as they hit your mind. Don't try to wait till the end because you'll forget about them. If you have the question, someone else in this audience has the same question, so help us keep it along. And there's no limit to the amount of questions that you can ask. So here's a little video about what we do.
Welcome to another Aero Marine free webinar.
Let me tell you who we are.
We help people who are buying aircraft, vessels, and vehicles to legally avoid the California tax. Just because you're a non-resident of California doesn't mean you're not subject to their assessment. So be smart about all of that. We do these for you because we're trying to give you free information. We do this all the time because you need it, because you've asked for it. And if you've got any subjects that you'd like us to cover that you haven't heard us cover in the past, just send me an email or send an email to Kelsey or call us at 916-691-9192 and we'll get you the information that you asked for.
So we have a little bit of feedback, and that's because we got to remember to turn the sound off. Ed and Annamarie, I'm going to blame it on you because I'm like that. All right, so here's Annamarie Buonocore. I believe that she was going to start first. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're going to do today.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about aviation journalism. It's often the backbone of aviation, as it is the backbone of many things. We have to have news. Everybody knows that's how the word gets important events and important subjects. So today, Ed and I are going to talk a little bit about the history, the importance, and the future of aviation journalism and how our industry is changing, how we're going to be doing more online, how we're going to be covering the aircraft and aviation events of the future. This is our magazine right here. I hope some of you will start reading it if you haven't, and if you do, thank you so much. We look forward to presenting today. I would like to introduce my presenting partner, Ed, who has been working with us for a long time. He's our ad sales director, and he's our resident expert. He has a long history of flying and has run many companies, has worked for Lockheed, and has done great things. And we're each going to do three slides each. And I will bring him on when it's his time to talk a little bit more about the history. So today we're going to start off with which came first. It's kind of a bit of a chicken and the egg. Was it aviation journalism or aviation? And it's really not an obvious answer because humanity has been flying and writing since ancient times. If you go back to ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient China, there are stories about people taking flight, about wings, about people flying off rooftops, about all kinds of great stories. And one story that we're going to talk a little bit about today is the Athenian myth of Icarus. Many ancient civilizations told such stories about flight going back years and years, and the myth of Icarus is about a young man named Icarus and his father who attempted to escape from Crete by means of wings, and the father built his son a pair of wings out of feathers and wax. And the father had to warn him not to fly too low to the sea because the moisture of the sea would dampen the wings, or too high because if he got too close to the sun, it would melt the wings. So this is just one example of an early story that teaches us a lot about the science and physics and dynamics of flight. And this isn't the only one. If you look up myths from all kinds of ancient civilizations, you will read such stories about flight. So Ed's going to take over and tell us a little bit about very early hot air balloons, which influenced modern aviation today. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everyone who has joined us for the webinar. This is Ed Downs. I've been with aviation with Inflight USA for probably about 9 years now. Time flies when you're having fun. And I've been an aviation professional for 63 years. Early on, I decided that it would be best if I could go through life without having an honest job and never grow up. Therefore, I became a professional pilot and have been interested in aviation history, and all that goes along with it. I work with Inflight USA, both as a manager of sales and also as their editor of industry and government affairs, having spent perhaps a little bit too much time in Washington, D.C. as a lobbyist on behalf of the airline industry. You know, we go back to the first manned flight. The Montgolfier brothers took place in France, 1783, and probably one of the greatest examples that exist regarding publications, journalism, and promotion of aviation. The Montgolfier brothers were very, very well connected with the establishment of France at that time, with the aristocracies of France. They were well funded, and they created a hot air balloon. It was truly a monster of a balloon. And the first flight did take place in 1783. But one of the really, truly interesting aspects of that flight was the fact that one of the greatest journalists of all time just happened to be there to cover the event, and that was Benjamin Franklin. And when he observed this, as he put it, we observed it lift off in the most majestic manner. When it reached about 250 feet in altitude, the intrepid voyagers lowered their hats to salute the spectators. We could not help but feeling a certain mixture of awe and admiration. Now, those are pretty important words, and they were very well received by the aristocracies, I might point out, to the extent that France, again, lent the United States, or the burgeoning United States, more money for its problematic relationship with Britain at the time. It's fair to say that journalism had something to do with, of all things, the Revolutionary War. So Franklin, very well respected as a scientist and a writer, had a huge impact with his opinions. Now, let's take a look at what the lack of journalism can do for you. Without the PR, without the advertising, without the promotion, you see, just 10 days later, a far more practical flight was made in England by the Robertson brothers, again, a brother team. And this was a hydrogen balloon, far more controllable, far more practical, a technology that evolved much better than hot air ballooning. And yet, probably if you ask most even aviation historians, they'll have very little memory of this. And it's simply because, well, old Ben decided not to show up due to the difficulties that we were having with King George at the time. They simply didn't get the PR. That's all there is to it. And as a point of interest, there's a rest of the story. While helium and hydrogen balloons continued to today's time from commercial use, the first hot air balloon, 3 days after its first flight, caught fire, incinerated, and almost took its crew with it. That part didn't get published. Only the good news made it to the stands. So the kind of press that we see today existed back then too. You hear what they want you to hear. Annamarie, go right ahead.
Well, thank you so much. That's true. You have to get the word out. Everybody knows you have to advertise your business. You have to promote what's going on in your world, and your world is flight. So flight not only works in prose, but also in verse. There were many great poets who wrote about flight as well, which helped bring the world to new heights and helped inspire people to fly. So in 1835, Alfred Lord Tennyson included a prophecy in the classic poem Locksley Hall. And this poem spoke to the heavens filled with commerce, argosies of magic sails, pilots of the purple twilight dropping down with costly bales. And these are beautiful words in this poem, and I thought I would read a few short stanzas. This the place and all around it, as old curls call, dreary gleams about the moorlands flying over Locksley Hall. Locksley Hall that in the distance overlooked the sandy tracts and the hollow ocean ridges roaring into cataracts. So it's a beautiful rhyming poem. This poem is really long. It would take all day to sit here and read it. But that's just one more example of how flight inspired writers and how writers inspired people to fly. So here on the next slide, we have some very famous writers who wrote about flight. We have over here Benjamin Franklin, who was, oops, I lose that slide, I'm sorry. We have Benjamin Franklin right here, who wrote about flight. We have James Salter, who wrote about flight, and we have Jules Verne, who was also a great writer. And all of these people wrote great stories that inspired flight and contributed to aviation journalism. Authors bring enthusiasm for international flight. They inspired flight not only here in the United States, which is the pioneer grounds of aviation, but also all over the world. They bring enthusiasm both in and out of the atmosphere. Jules Verne, as on the last slide, took literature and aviation to new heights, and some say that he helped invent the helicopter. He published the first aviation magazine, which was titled Aeronaut, and this was a very early aviation newspaper right here. John Montgomery and Powered Man Flight, glider flights by Montgomery in the 1880s piqued the quest for manned flight. This was a major event in aviation journalism, and all major newspapers covered and carried coverage of Montgomery's flights. And you could read more about that. This is a picture of John Montgomery. This is actually a painting. So flight inspired many artists as well as writers and poets. And that's why this was a very exciting time after John Montgomery, because it inspired a frenzy of aviation news. Now Ed's going to talk to us a little bit about the Wright Brothers.
The press really took an incredible interest when the Wright brothers took flight. Obviously occurred, most people know the date, December 17th, 2003. This event was covered by over 50 major news publications around the world and began an almost frenzy for more news about aviation. Santos Dumont, his flights that were taking place in Paris at the time, Valerio and his crossing of the English Channel. And for those who are listening and might like to see a comedic rendition of the kind of news coverage and interest that existed during this, was nearly a frenzy of information. There was a motion picture, a comedic motion picture made, I believe, in the early 70s called The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines. And while clearly a comedy, the actual presentation of the events and, remarkably enough, recreations of the airplanes were stunningly accurate, even though there was stereotyping of different nations competing and all. It's a very, very humorous fun film. A lot of historical relevance, and it certainly displayed the interest that journalists had and the amount of interest journalism caused in aviation during that period of time. Flying became a true passion. the publications themselves dedicated entire section to aviation. Photographs were very, very common. Stories were plentiful, some quite fantastic in what they were trying to report, others remarkably accurate. It's quite interesting when one goes back to some of these old publications that you begin to realize not only did they report on what was happening, but they created industry and implanted in the public's mind the names of aviation products, something that simply had not existed before that particular time. It's truly an industry that was created by journalism. When you industry and some of the major players, almost too numerous to count, names like Cessna, Beech, Douglas, gosh, many others, they specifically used public relations, PR, journalism to promote their particular products. The winning of a major air race meant business, and therefore publishing their wins became incredibly important. While today one thinks that simply telling a story, perhaps on a website, will do the job, the funny thing is folks back in those days realized, hey, telling the story isn't just it. You have to help people live the story. And they created an industry. You know, the air racing events, the early air shows, such as the Cleveland air races, sold advertising in their programs. It was all part of the way the system was run. As these companies grew, so did the aviation magazines themselves. Annamarie, go right ahead.
Great. So we're going to talk a little bit about early aviation magazines. Sometimes I think we're old in the business. We've been around for 35 years, but really we're quite young, because they had niche magazines like Popular Aviation, Flying, Air Trails. These magazines were as popular as many sports magazines or sports sections of today. As Ed once told me, any kid who could cough up a dime to buy an issue would go running down to the stand and get one. So this was a very popular sport back then. And these are some pictures of some old aviation magazines. If you go to your local aviation museum like Planes of Fame or Hiller here in San Carlos, they have entire archives and libraries filled with not only our old back issues starting in the 1980s, but some of these that go way back. Not only was aviation a big deal for niche magazines that focused strictly on aviation, but the mass media, meaning your general daily newspapers, were also, they had entire sections that focused on aviation. Many general newspapers covered big aviation events, such as the early Reno air races that started 56 years ago, and of course before that there were the Cleveland air races. Having an aviation section was as common as having a sports section or the funnies. Results of air races, coverage of air shows, and new developments in flight were all covered and featured. People wrote about this and enjoyed writing about this, as many of our writers in our magazine do. And we continue to bring in new writers. And that's really what makes this community, this network of people who come together to fly into these events like the Reno air races in Oshkosh so great, is that we get together and write about our experiences, and that's why we're here. That's why I'm passionate about doing what I do. Then there's the famed Gordon Bennett races. This was another big aviation event. The New York Herald newspaper, which was a very important publication, sponsored these early races, going all the way back to the 1910s. The Bennett Trophy is still a very important award in aviation and is still given for achievements in aviation today. We're going to talk a little bit about Colliers Magazine, which was one publication that changed the world, and I think I'll let Ed talk about that.
Thanks, Annamarie. Colliers Magazine, I must admit, is a very personal publication as far as I'm concerned. I was in grammar school at the time some of the articles were published by Colliers Magazine, and it was read to, as I recall, to our class in the 5th grade, and it began to really initiate a lot of interest in flying. Now, even at that age, I was already pretty much committed that I was going to be an aviator when I grew up. Fortunately, I don't think I ever reached that state, but nonetheless, the Colliers Magazine, interestingly enough, the owners of Colliers, Mr. Collier himself, became interested in aviation at the turn of the century. Their first articles actually appeared in 1905, and he covered technology and aviation ever since that time. Now, it was in the late 40s, early 50s that there was a major change that took place in our country and concern, and these gentlemen began to enter the picture. Many of the viewers will probably recognize the gentleman in the center, Werner von Braun. And you'd say, well, what does that have to do with Colliers Magazine? Well, not only does it have a lot to do with Colliers Magazine, but it has to do with the entire space program. From 1952 to 1953, 8 articles were published that probably had as much to do as a singular event as any other publication, series of articles, or for that matter, even congressional efforts to promote the aerospace industry and space technologies in America. These 8 articles started with the American space program, and they predicted what was going to happen. This was basically Werner von Braun's plans for what we have today, which is ISS, the International Space Station. The articles were incredibly detailed, and when one reads these articles, you realize that these gentlemen in this particular series of articles, and it was a compendium of experts and physicists and scientists that worked in this particular project. This was truly a learned event. Had it pretty much figured out. It was simply the mechanics and the technology that had to catch up with their thinking, and many of them led us into the space exploration that we have today. Truly an impactful event. I might point out, for those who would like to even know more about this, we do show a website that you can go to read these articles, and these articles were compiled into a book called Across the Space Frontier. It not only contains a collection of these particular articles, but also of the extremely well-known art that was created to represent what these gentlemen were talking about, in terms of spacecraft as well as exploration of other planets, Mars, other items, and it's certainly worth a look. I think I went one slide too far. Let me go back. There we go.
Okay, great. Thank you for telling us a little bit about Colliers. It's certainly a very important piece of history, American history really, to understand how the space program came into fruition. And I noticed on my screen, I don't know about anybody else, but the link was cutting off. So we'll have our contact information at the end of the presentation, and you can email us if you'd like to get that link. So the point we're trying to make today is that aviation publications are helping the industry grow. They've always helped us grow, and we can continue to offer that service. A lot of people may not see value in print anymore, but articles and ads in aviation publications continue to lead in presenting this new information. There's no form of communication that's beating a well-written article about events and product offerings. So if you're a writer who can write a well-written article, you have something amazing to give to your industry, and we'd like to help publish you and see you grow as a writer. Print complements digital, and it's not dead. It's still very well read today. And we have a strong digital presence, as many general aviation magazines do. It's really a whole system that works together between the print and the digital. So it's all about working together. Articles combined with print ads and web coverage of aviation news is now the modern triad that can bring products and services to the attention of targeted markets. There are many magazines that focus on specific areas in aviation, such as avionics. We're more of a general aviation magazine. We serve all kinds of people who are interested in aviation from all walks of life. We bring enjoyment and information to people from all walks of life who simply enjoy flight. Not everybody who reads us has experience working in the field of aviation or has a pilot's license. Maybe they're working toward it. We've worked with a lot of student pilots. We've worked with people who are interested in owning a plane one day. And this is really a great resource for people looking to buy. We have a great classified section, and it's a great product reviews. We have really wonderful information in here. So it's all about working together, both online and in print, to bring you the very best information and enjoyment. Where do we go from here? We're talking a lot about our future. We had our solid beginnings, and now we're going to progress toward our future. Our industry is changing. There's new aircraft, and just a little bit about us. We started in 1984, almost 36 years ago. This has been a family business founded by Ciro and Vicki Buonocore. We're 52 pages long, and we have a circulation of about 40,000 print readers per month. Online, we get about 120,000 viewers per month, so we're a very good and effective tool for PR and advertising. We feature historical articles, military articles, and glimpses both into the present and the future. As you can see on our May cover, we featured Sky Scopes, and that's a new program with drones doing some great work in the environmental space. We also have working with a company closely out of the Livermore Airport called Skycam, and they're using Cessnas and general aviation aircraft to do even more effectively what a lot of drones are trying to do. So we strongly encourage you to look at that article and make sure to get our September issue, because that's going to be featured on our cover. So as a second-generation family business, we're very proud to serve the general aviation communities. We're based here in San Francisco, just south of the city, about 20 miles south, and we serve general aviation airports throughout the country. I was just in the Lake Tahoe area visiting Reno Stead. We tend to get out to as many as possible. Ed is in the Oklahoma area, and he gets out to airports in Kansas and in Texas. So we try our best to be a nationwide publication. And we thank you for your support and for reading our magazine all these years. Why should you use Inflight USA for your promotional needs? We have been the publishing pros. We can help with PR and promotions. Sometimes these amateur websites, not that they're bad, not that you shouldn't read them, but they can often do more harm than good if not carefully designed. Search engines can lead to prospective customers to competitors. Sometimes that happens, and this is a great targeted way to reach your audience through our website, which gets a very high amount of foot traffic, and our print publication, which is very well read, especially here in the Bay Area and in the Los Angeles area. And we know that Tom is a California-based company here in Sacramento, and we serve the Sacramento Executive Airport, so we know that it's a good target. Here are some things that we can offer you. In addition to putting an ad in our magazine or using our magazine, we also offer some consulting services where we can assist you with graphics and brochures. We have print ads. Of course, putting a print ad in our magazine is great. We have some great deals right now for AirVenture, including our inside front cover. These are huge. This is a little bigger. It's a tabloid-sized magazine. So you get a pretty big space. And we can help with press releases and reviews of products. Ed has written some great product reviews for iCloth and many other companies that are doing great work in aviation. So I see we have a question here. How do you see aviation progressing in the future? And I think we have a great future ahead of us. Sometimes it's easy to be discouraged because we have a pilot shortage. We may not necessarily have a lot of people getting into the aviation space, but I was really rejuvenated when I came out of an interview with Skycam the other day. Like I said, they're based out of Livermore Airport, and they're doing great work with regular general aviation Cessnas and Pipers. They're taking images of railroads. They're finding problems on railroad tracks, and they're passing this information on to the government so that something can be done about this, about environmental problems, about homelessness, about problems on our railroad tracks. And I think younger people, he has a whole team of younger people in their 20s who participated in the interview working for his company. And I think that the younger people will see the many jobs that aviation has to offer. There's great organizations like Women in Aviation Worldwide, where my colleagues are doing a great job inspiring younger women. There's the Young Eagles. They're taking kids up in flights, and kids are having a lot of fun at air shows like the upcoming Truckee Tahoe. And I think, despite of what some people might say, we have a great future ahead of us. And I hope that we can keep publishing for as long as we can, at least digitally, hopefully both in print and digitally. So that is what we can offer you. We can offer you any kind of assistance, whether it takes place on our website or in our magazine, or for your own printed or digital products. Like I said, we all have backgrounds in writing here, and we can certainly help write website content and write brochures, help with press releases. We would love to work with anybody who is interested in taking their business to the next level through the written word, because we here believe in aviation, and we believe in the written word to get us to the heights. So learn from history and let aviation journalism work for you. Let's see, Ed, do you have anything else you'd like to add here to this?
Yes, Annamarie, I can make two comments. One, from a personal standpoint, with respect to my relationship with Inflight USA. As Annamarie knows, I did not meet Inflight USA as an employee, but as an advertiser. I owned an aircraft company and began using Inflight USA for promotional purposes with respect to PR and advertising, and got results. One of the most important things to me as a businessman was the ability to make an announcement and have it published typically within 2 weeks of the announcement going out. Most other publications require a 90-day lead time, not Inflight USA. As a businessman, that was important to me. As an individual working with Inflight USA, I saw the industry crash in 2008, 2010, and it has been rebuilding slowly. But as an active CFI and instructor, and an individual who does consulting in technically advanced aircraft, I have seen a steady increase in business throughout the industry, steady increase in class sizes of individuals learning to fly for all ratings. For those of you who may be thinking about advertising and thinking about promoting your business, the last slide says it all. Learn from history, because history tells us that simply putting your name out there is not enough. People need to read about you. Annamarie, go ahead.
Well, thank you again. And I see we have one question here. What led both you and Ed to your careers at Inflight Magazine? Well, for me, it was a family business. Like I said, my dad started it in the 1980s, but it was more than just a family business. I would go on deliveries with him even as a kid. I remember going to the old at the Livermore Airport before there was nothing else out there, really. So I have a history with it. But it's more than that for me, because I also tended to go in the direction of writing. I studied English and history. I started a literary magazine when I was in college. It featured poetry, creative nonfiction, fiction writing, essays, and it just seemed like a natural progression to go into the family business. That's kind of it for me, and I think Ed talked about why he got involved with Inflight USA. Did you want to say anything else about that?
Standpoint of continuing in a career with Inflight USA, don't challenge me for my job, you ain't going to get it. Because Inflight USA, especially for a guy like me who's been in the business for a long time, one hates to lose contact, to lose skills. And Inflight USA demands that I stay current, that I know what's going on in the industry, I know what the rules and regulations are, and I keep up with technology. All of this serves me personally to stay sharp in a business I've spent a lot of years in. I'm very grateful for what Inflight USA has had to offer me. Annamarie, go ahead. Are there any other questions?
Okay, so feel free to buy a subscription. It's only $24.95. You can pick us up at your local airport. If you don't see any, give us a call. We'll get them out there. These are some of our favorite covers. We have a dynamic cover program where you can actually get featured on our cover. Feel free to call us for more information. It's 650-358-9908. This is our website. I don't know, it kind of got a little blurred out, but it's www.inflightUSA.com. You can contact me here, Annamarie at inflightUSA.com, for help with any press releases or editorial. And then Ed at Inflight USA for any advertising needs that you might have. So we are so thankful for everybody who came out today to watch us and to listen to what we had to say, for believing in us, for all of your support for the last 35 years. It's been our pleasure to serve you, and we plan to continue to serve you. We look forward to hearing from anybody else with any questions. And on behalf of the entire staff as well as the Buonocore family, thank you so much for listening to our presentation today.
Annamarie and Ed, I want to thank you for the wonderful history lesson. I learned some things today that I had absolutely no idea about. I've enjoyed your publication for probably, I think, since you first started out in the 80s. I believe it was in the early 80s or mid 80s. I think you did a great job doing the history lesson. I'm glad that you have this contact information available so people can get back to you. And I'm going to give us about 30 more seconds for someone who, if anybody has any other questions before we end this event. So this goes out to the audience. If you have any questions, here's your opportunity. Please ask it. Well, it looks like we're not getting any. So anyway, thank you very much for the great presentation, both Ed and Annamarie, and we're going to sign off now. Thank you.